G'day guys. In this tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to look at, we're going to carry on from the last tutorial where we set up the AI movement for this guy using the behavior trees and the tasks and everything. And then what we're going to do in this one is we're going to create a projectile launching ability to run through the behavior tree. So this guy, while he's moving around and chasing us and all that, he can shoot at us as well. And the way that we're going to set that up is we're going to use a actor component, and we're going to build the projectile launching ability inside of the component so that it can be added to this guy's blueprint, but can also be added to any other AI blueprint or even to a player blueprint, so that all the AI and the player even can all have access to the same projectile launching ability. I think that's all we're going to do. Let me just check my thing. I want to just run over selector nodes and sequence nodes and kind of explain what they are. So let's just do that really quick, because I feel like I kind of glossed over this a little bit in the last tutorial, so I just want to give this a solid explanation before we go forward. So in this behavior tree, all the logic starts from the root. So these gray nodes like this, these aren't actual like logical tasks like finding locations or moving to. These are more just like figuring out which tasks we want to actually select. This is like the selection logic of the behavior tree, if that makes any sense. So the chain starts from here, the execution starts from here, and what a selector node does is it looks at all of these things that are connected to it, and it tries to run the one that is top priority, and the top priority starts from the left. So the first thing that the selector node does is it looks to the one on the very left, and it sees, okay, can I satisfy this condition, and can I run this task? And if it can't do this one, it'll try this one, the next one to the right, and if it can't do that, it'll do this one, and it'll keep going until it succeeds. And once it succeeds, so say it succeeds on this one here, the roaming one, it's finished. This selector node is finished, and it's not going to try and run this one over here. Instead, what it does is if this one succeeds, it marks this as successful, and then it goes back up to the root, and the root starts again, and it does the same thing. The selector is different to the sequence, because what the sequence does is it goes from left to right, but instead of after one of the tasks succeeds, instead of marking this as a success and then going back up to the root, once one of these succeeds, it moves on to the next one and the next one, and it goes through all of them until all of them succeed. But if it's going through, say it's finding a roaming location, and then it tries to move to, and for whatever reason the move to fails, then this whole sequence fails. It'll forget about that. This whole sequence will fail, and then the execution will start from the root again. So the selector just selects selects a branch starting from the top priority, and will keep moving from left to right until it finds something that works. The sequence node will run all of them from left to right, and if it fails, the whole branch will fail. There is another node called a parallel node, a simple parallel. And what this one does is it just runs a task on this one, and while it's running that, it can just do a bunch of other shit off of this one. So you can have a selector node, and you can say blah blah blah, do this, etc. I try not to. The reason that I didn't go into too much depth in these in the last one is because we didn't really have a solid example like we do now. I find it really hard to explain this sort of stuff in the abstract without having something that you can actually look at. So I really believe that the best way to learn this sort of stuff isn't to listen to me talk about it even, or even to read about it or whatever. Like, it's just, I think the best way to learn it is to just do it and like follow someone else doing it and do it yourself and try and make your own variations and just like see what works and see what doesn't work. That's the only way that you'll learn how to use these things. So with all that said, let's get started and let's build this projectile launching component. So what I said in the beginning of this is we're going to build this in a component so that we can reuse it. So the way that we do that is we go blueprint class, and we want to go, so there's actor component and there's scene component. They're basically the exact same thing, except a scene component has a transform and can be attached to other scene components. We're going to use this one because we're going to use the transform of this scene component as the projectile spawn point. So let's click that. And let's just call this projectile launching component. And one other thing that I'll talk a little bit more later is I'm not going to set up any damage system for this at the moment. So we'll be able to launch a projectile with this, but when the projectile hits the player or hits an enemy or whatever, it's not going to do anything. And the reason for that is because setting up a robust damage system that can work across all of your AI and across all of the player, it's an important thing to do in its own right, and it deserves its own video. And I have got its own video, which I'll put a link in the description to, so you can feel free to look at that and integrate that damage system in with this AI if you want. It's completely compatible and it'll work really well. I'm just going to create a new folder here for all our projectile launching stuff. Let's just call it projectiles. Yeah, so no damage in this tutorial. I'm just going to show you how to launch projectiles, and we can maybe integrate the damage into the projectiles another time. So let's open that up. And let me just open up our patrolling AI. So the way that you add the component into here is you just add component, and then you type in projectile launching component, and there you go. Now that's added. So you can see it's got a transform. Let's just drag that out the front of this guy. So maybe just like there, that's where he can spawn his projectiles from. And the way that this is going to work is inside of this component, we're just going to create an event called launch projectile, and the only thing that's going to be variable on that event is the location of the target. That probably doesn't make any sense, but let's just do it, and I'll explain it as we go. So custom event, this is going to be called launch projectile at location. We will probably need to create a projectile, so let's do that. This will be really quick. So we'll go blueprint class, type actor, and just call this projectile. And we'll just add a static mesh. We'll make it a sphere over here, material sphere, because that's got a pivot point right in the center. And let's just change that scale to 0.25 so it's not so big. And honestly, like, we could probably just leave it like that. We'll make it simulate physics though, and that will be all, I think. Let's just see how big that is. Yeah, it's a decent size. Okay. This will be super basic. Like, you can obviously make these pretty static meshes with pretty colors and particle systems and everything. Actually, let's put him on fire. Why the fuck not? So I'm just going to attach the particle system to the static mesh, and then I am going to... Oh, I've got different colored explosions and stuff. Cool. Okay. I'm just thinking maybe I should make this the root. No, I'm not going to do that. Let's just leave this like this. Okay. Yeah, sure. Alright, let's just roll with that. Actually, you know what? Maybe we'll make that the root. Oh no, because then I'll need to change the scale each time I spawn one of these things. Let's just leave it like that. The only reason I wanted to make it as the root was because this static mesh is going to be the thing that's flying through the air, and if the default scene root doesn't actually move, we can't use a get actor location to figure out the location of the static mesh. But I suppose that doesn't really matter for now. Let's just roll with it like this. My voice is getting a little bit crackly. Okay, so launch projectile at location. The first thing that we'll do is we'll say spawn actor from class. Now, the class of projectile, let's promote that to a variable and just call this proj class, so that this could potentially be changed for different AI, but let's just have the default as our projectile that we just made. Now the spawn transform, that's going to be the location of this scene component, so we can say get world transform of self. Yeah, cool. So this is this transform that it'll be getting is the transform of this right there, the world transform right there. So that should be working just like that. And now what we'll do, oh, okay, so let's see what's going on here. So because this is a variable, we can't actually, this is a actor object reference rather than a projectile reference. Sorry, that probably didn't make any sense. I'm not really thinking about what I'm saying. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete that variable, and we're just going to use this as projectile for now. Just like that. And then off of this, and so now that's not actor, that's actually projectile object reference. So now we can say get static mesh. And that static mesh is this one here, which maybe we can rename. Maybe we can call that sphere. So now we can say get that sphere, and we can say set linear. Actually, you know what would be a better way to do this is maybe we can use a projectile movement component. If we add projectile movement, then perhaps we could... Yeah, okay, so let's give this a try. I don't think I've ever actually done this before, so bear with me if this doesn't work too well, but I think it'll work better. So let's just say promote to variable again, and we'll call this projectile class. And then what we're going to do is off of this, we're going to say get component by class. And the class that we're going to be getting is its projectile movement component. And now let's do an is valid check off of this, and if it's not valid, let's just print a string, and then the print string can say this is just an error for us, so if something goes wrong while you're making a game, you just know vaguely what's going on. So projectile launched doesn't have projectile movement component. So the way that we were going to make it move is we were just going to set its physics velocity, but I think what we'll do instead is we'll set its projectile movement velocity. So off of here we can say set velocity. And now what we want to do is we want to set the velocity towards a specified target. So where we've got launch projectile at location, let's create a new variable, and we'll just call this target location, and that can be of type vector. And we're just going to set this here, and the target location is going to come from the actual event. So now what we want to do over here is when we set the velocity, what we could do actually to stop this from getting messy is we could also promote this to a variable and just call this projectile component movement ref. I like to just save variables like this to stop big long lines of nodes connecting across the blueprint. It just makes it so much easier to follow. But that's just me. You can do whatever you want. If you like spaghetti, blueprint spaghetti, that's fine. So now the velocity of the projectile, we're going to use a times float node. The float is going to be the speed of the projectile, so that can be called speed. And the direction, this needs to be a unit vector, so this can be unit direction vector, because a unit direction vector has a length of 1, and if you multiply 1 by the speed, then you get an accurate velocity, if that makes sense. Now from the place that we're going to be launching it from is going to be the spawn point of the world transform of the spawn point, so that can just go in there, and 2 is just going to be our target location, like that. So this will set the velocity in the direction of the target at the speed that we've specified here. So now what we need to do just over here to keep things organized is let's organize these variables into different categories. So this projectile movement component is going to be, I'm going to put that in a category called internal, because that's something that we don't edit. That's something that's set inside of the blueprint and is referenced later. So that's going to be called internal. Target location is internal as well. But these two here, these are toggleable. I'll call those toggleable. That sounds like such a funny word. So projectile class and projectile speed, you could make them public as well, I guess, if you wanted. So that one's default to projectile, and this one can be defaulted to like 2,000 units of velocity. So the reason that I wanted to keep them separate is in our patrolling AI, if we go into the projectile launching component, these are the internal variables here. They're the ones that we don't want to touch, because changing them will do absolutely nothing to this, because they just reset in the logic. But the toggleable ones, we could potentially change the projectile here, and this guy could launch different projectiles than, say, like his cousin Bob, which might be like another AI. And then the speed here, we can also change the speed of this guy's projectiles as well to whatever we want. So let's leave that there. I think that should be done as it is, I reckon. We could just have a sound just to make it obvious that he's actually launching the projectiles. Spawn sound. Let's actually, instead of making that 2D, I'm going to do this properly. Let's say spawn sound at location, and I'm going to show you how to use sound attenuation if you've never done that before. So the sound is just going to be an explosion. The location is going to be this, the world transform of the scene component. That's where we want the spawned sound to come from. The pitch, etc. is all good. Now for sound attenuation, let's just go in here. I think it's in miscellaneous. Sound attenuation, is there a sound attenuation? Sounds, that's probably, yep, sound attenuation, okay. I'm just going to call this my sound attenuation. Original name, I know. My sound attention, that'll do, because I cannot spell. So the inner radius is 400, so anything inside of 400 units away from the sound will be full volume, and the fall off distance is 3,600, and anything beyond that will be silent, and it's just a linear interpolation between the two. If that makes sense. That was a lot of big words. So now we can just put that in there, and now the sound will fade off the further you are away. Okay, so we could have a particle system as well. So let's just say spawn emitter. Our location, the location is the same, and this can just be an explosion. Okay, now let's just probably comment some of this. So this can just be called feedback. This can be called velocity. Itty. Should really have some music or something on in the background. Unless, I don't know, the silence is kind of cool. And this can be called launch projectile. I cannot spell, but it doesn't matter. You get the point. And this here can be, I'm going to label this called from BTT or player. Okay, I think that should be working. So now I guess what we can do is we can just go into his behavior tree and set up an event. So let's go to, actually before we do that, let's just go back into our projectile, and I might just change this back to, instead of simulate physics, let's just leave that on block all, so that it doesn't have gravity. I think it'll have its projectile movement, but it won't have gravity, which will be good because it'll just float across the world until it hits something. And I'll show you how you can potentially set up damage for that later, but I won't go through it in too much detail. So let's go into our patrolling AI BP. While he's chasing the player, we want him to simultaneously shoot. So off of this sequence node, we could just have a simple parallel. And what he could be doing is, so he could be moving to his target, and while he's moving to his target, we could have a sequence down here, a sequence of behaviors. The first one will be a new task, which we will call, where'd it go? Here we go. This can be launch projectile at target. Alright, so let's set that up first, actually. So, actually no, before we set that up, I'll just show you how this is gonna look. So this can be launch projectile at target, and then we can just have a weight, and the weight can just be, maybe we can actually have a, is there a wait blackboard time? So maybe we can have like a cooldown time here. So the reason that we'd want to use a wait blackboard time, because if you use just a normal wait node like this, you can set it the value that you want in there. But perhaps you had like a patrolling AI that had like different tiers of the same class, if you know what I mean. So you imagine you had like a patrolling AI level 1 and a patrolling AI level 2 and level 3 and level 4 and level 5. What you might want to do is, as the levels get higher and higher, is you might want the cooldown, this is essentially going to be a cooldown time, you might want the cooldown time to be less and less between the shots, so in which case you'd want to use a blackboard key, otherwise you'd need to have a new behavior tree for every single different tier of that enemy. So for this blackboard time, we have a blackboard key up there, so we'll just create a float in here, and then we can use that. So if you go to blackboard, let's call this, we'll go type float, and this can just be called cooldown 01, because perhaps you might have different cooldown times for different things. So I'm just going to call that cooldown 1, and that's already automatically set it to cooldown 1, so that's how much time he'll wait. Now we need to make sure that cooldown 1 is actually being set. So if we go into patrolling AI, if you watched the first video, you would have seen that we set up a function called set blackboard, no, what was it called? BB key, update BB key. We created a function to update the blackboard key. If you didn't watch that tutorial, probably go and watch it, but this is basically just how it looks. It's just a function that allows us to update any key that we want. Oh, we don't actually have one for a float in here, so let's do that. So what we need to do is, if we go to key types, we're going to add one called float, and now we'll be able to update floats on the blackboard. So off of here we'll say set value as, well no, we can't do that, we need to drag off of blackboard and say set value as float, and the key name can be plugged into make literal name there, and then this can go into float up there, the execution pin, and that can be dragged down there to be nice and neat, and then that gets plugged into the actual function. So now that we've got that set into there, we can close that and we can go to our patrolling AI. The AI controller is going to be get AI controller, sorry, and the controlled actor is going to be ourself. Yep, that's all good. And this is the float that we did. Let me rewind. The key that we're going to be setting is called cooldown01, and the key type is of type float. And now this is irrelevant because that's not being used, that's not being used, that's not being used. The float value here, we're going to promote to a variable and call that projectile launching cooldown. And that can be made public. And actually, so can the behavior tree. We can make that public as well. And then what we could do is you could both put these into a category called toggleable as well. So when we're going to make different tiers of this enemy, we can just go to this category and we know that everything inside of this could potentially be changed. So the cooldown for this we're going to have set to 2, and if we made a second tier, then perhaps it could be 1, a third tier could be 0.5, or like etc. Depends how aggressive you want to make your AI. Something that you could do actually if you wanted to get really adventurous is when you're setting this key is you could say get random float in range, and you could say div float here. The minimum could be that, and then the max could be divided by 0.5, or aka times 2. And so now what you'd get if you had a little system like this is every different instance of this patrolling AI will have a slightly different cooldown time, so they all seem a little bit different. Maybe we should leave that there. Yeah, let's leave that there. That's fine. So if you cooldown times 2, it'll have a max cooldown time of 4 and a min cooldown time of 1. So there's just a little bit of variation. I didn't need to do that. Why did I do that? I need to take a sip of water because my throat's getting sore, but I don't have one. Okay, I'm just going to push through it. What the hell was I up to? I can't remember. So now that blackboard key's being set, so this cooldown time's being set, we actually need to set up the launch projectile ability. So in here, the first thing we'll say is receive execute AI. And what we're going to do off the controlled pawn is we're going to say get component by class. How long have we been going for? I don't want this to be too long. 22 minutes, god damn. We can say is valid. Actually, you know what? This is the second time that we've done this, isn't it? Maybe we could put this into a function. No, let's not do that just yet. Okay, so we're getting the component, which is the projectile launching component. And if it's not valid, actually, you know what? Let's put this into a function. I'm just going to show you. We're going to go back to our function library, my AI functions, where we created this blackboard key thing, and this is going to be called get component if valid. Oh god, I think we can do this anyway. Maybe it should be a macro instead. No, this will do. This will do. So the target here is going to be owner, and the component that we're going to be getting needs to be input there as well. And then if the component isn't valid, we're going to say actually maybe we should append this. Let's say append tried to get component but wasn't valid, and then we'll just hook up into here the name of the component that we tried to get, and maybe we will also have an owner thing. We'll just say owner, and the owner was our owner up here like that. So now we can call this function whenever we want, and we need to have a return node actually. Let's have a return node here, and on that return node let's just have a boolean which will be called valid, and we'll also need the component reference on there as well, and this can be called component ref. So if it is valid, we tick valid as true, and if it's not valid down here we just tick that as false, or untick that rather, and then we don't worry about the component ref. So now let's close that down, and now off of here we can say get component if valid. World context doesn't matter. We can put control pawn into owner, and the component class is the projectile launching component. So now what we do, off of valid, we just have a branch, and then if it is valid, we can promote this to a variable and call this projectile launching component ref. Okay, cool. Now the reason that I set that up into that function is because if we look back in here, we also use that just here for this exact same thing. And every time that you make a new ability for an AI behavior tree, is you'll want to be getting the component that you've built the ability in. So you'll be using this a lot right at the start when you do these execute AI things. So it's good to have that as a function if you're going to be building lots of different behaviors and abilities and things. So now that we've got that, we can use this and we can say launch, no, what was it? Projectile, what was our event called? Oh, actually, hang on. So this is just an actor component. It's not of the right type. So what we need to do here is, if that's valid, we need to say cast to projectile launching component. And then actually we need to get rid of that, and we need to change this here. We need to change the type of this to projectile launching component. And the reason that we wanted to do that is because otherwise we don't actually have access to the events and the variables inside of this blueprint. So now, if we compile and save that, we can say launch projectile location, which is our event that we set up in here, this here. So we can plug that into there like that, and now it's just asking for the target location. Where do we want to launch the projectile at? And to do that, we're going to use a Blackboard key. So let's say, let's have a look at the keys that we've got. We have a target key here. So what we could do is we could just get the location of that target and then launch it at the target. So we're going to need to create a new variable, and this can be called target actor key because it's going to be of type actor. And then this is going to be Blackboard key selector. That's the variable type, and this needs to be public because we're going to be setting that in the behavior tree right there. That's it. So we get that, we say get as actor, and then we need to get the actor location. And then once we've got the actor location, we can plug that into there. And now whenever this event is fired, it's going to launch the projectile at the location. Okay, and then we say finish execute to mark it as a success so that the behavior tree can get on with doing whatever it's doing. Okay, I think that is all good. So if we go back into here, our behavior tree, we just need to set the target actor key to target. And now while it's moving to the target, it'll constantly be launching projectiles at the target. And let's just expand that little comment thing. Chase player and shoot, we'll call this. Now, I guess this is the moment of truth now, because we have set up all of this and we haven't actually checked if any of it works. So let's see. So he's running around doing his thing, and if he turns around, come on, look at me. Oh, it's working. Crazy. Who would have thought? It looked like he was... His projectiles are falling through the ground though, and I guess that's because they have gravity. So if we go into the projectile, where is it? Projectile here. Does this have like a gravity, enable gravity? We want to disable that, and it's probably, here we go, projectile gravity scale, set that to 0. Hopefully that explosion sound isn't too loud. Look at that, damn. That's working like a dream. I've got to stop falling off the edge. And if I run around the corner and we lose sight of him, or he loses sight of us, he should stop shooting. Hopefully you can still hear me. Yeah, he stopped shooting, check that out. And now he's he's going back to his origin. We set that up in the last video, and now he's going to continue to roam. Beautiful. And then if we walk back in front of him again, neato. Cool, man. It actually works. Who would have thought? I'm always somewhat surprised at myself when the shit that I build actually works. Anyway, so I explained the selector nodes. We set up, this is the last video by the way. If you're interested in any of the stuff that's written in here and you haven't seen the last video, check out the last video in the series. We set up the ability component. We set up the task for launching the projectile at a target. We haven't set up the projectile launching for the player, so maybe let's just do that. I want to show you that you can actually use this same ability for the player. So we can probably close all of this down now. Oops. And what's the player that I'm using? I'm assuming it's the third person player. Third person character. I've got a bunch of shit in here from previous tutorials, by the way, so don't be distracted by any of that. So if we go add component and we say projectile launching component, and then we say input mouse right mouse button. So whenever we click the right mouse button, what we could do is we could grab our projectile launching component, which we'll need to set up the proper location for. So let's just put it out in front of him like that. He can just launch from his ball sack. Now we can drag off of the projectile launching component and say launch projectile at location. And the location that we're going to launch at, we could just get the follow camera and get the forward vector from the follow camera, because our mannequin dude, he only changes his direction to face the direction that he's walking in, but the camera is changed by the mouse, and that just feels more natural. So we can say get forward vector. Now this is asking for a location, not a directional vector, so we need to what will we need to do? We'll need to say add vector. We'll need to get our location, and then we'll need to add the forward vector onto that. So that'll get our location plus 1 unit of the vector in the direction that the camera's facing, and then that can be the target location. So that'll just launch it in the general direction that is forward from the camera. I don't know if that makes any fucking sense at all, but let's see if it works. Alright, I'm going to right click. Check that out. Oh, these ones are blue. And you know why I think they're blue? Because I think I've set this up in another tutorial actually. Let me just have a look. Do I have a right mouse button, launch laser projectile? Oh, okay, so I've done that without a component though. So let's just disconnect that. Sorry about that. Stop fucking shooting at me, Fred. So now, have I lost him? Can you just piss off? Yep, okay. So now if I shoot. Okay, so that's not launching in the right direction. You know why? It was launching through the character, and the reason was, so see where this is. The position that we told it to launch at was the location of this guy plus 1 unit, so it would have been like there, literally right on his ball sack. So he would have launched it to his ball sack, shooting himself in the nuts. Now, so to fix that, what we can do is we can grab this forward vector, and we can just say times float. And I think this was out by 100 units, so as long as this is multiplied by more than 100, it'll launch out in front, I think. Let's see. Fuck off, Fred. Sick of your shit. Alright, check that out. Boom. It's still launching from in front of him though. But they're launching in the correct direction, I think. Yeah, kinda. I think what we might need to do is, instead of getting the actor location, we should probably get the location of the spawn point. That makes a lot more sense actually. Why didn't I do that the first time? Oh boy. Yes, that should work better. Yeah, that works. Hopefully you can hear me again. So if I shoot it at the moon or the sun or whatever, yeah, that seems to work. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but instead of having this just sitting out in front of him like that, what we could do is we could actually attach that to the follow camera. That'd probably make more sense. Oh yeah, like where I've put the one for the last tutorial. And the tutorial before, by the look of it. Fuck, how many tutorials have I done this in? Jesus Christ. So now it should launch from right out in front of him, whichever way he's facing. Yeah, there we go. That's better. Okay, those volumes are down low, thank God. Hopefully that is not too loud. Okay, that's it. That's it for this tutorial. The AI is doing his shooting thing. We can set it up for the player as well. It's the exact same projectile system. So what we could do now is like we could create all different kinds of projectiles, to be honest. And then if we click on this, maybe our player could launch a different one. Our player could launch at a different speed to the AI. And I'll just quickly show you back in our patrolling AI thing. We can create a child of him, and this can be patrolling AI child 01, and this guy could be like the next level up from the previous one. And so what you'd do in here to make this guy harder is you'd click on this and you'd make his projectiles faster, just like that, 3000. Now what happened to our cooldown time? Didn't we have a variable for cooldown time? Because we want to change that on the different tiers as well. So if we go in here, projectile launching cooldown is in toggleable in patrolling AI. Where is the cooldown? That's interesting. Why doesn't that show up? Projectile launching cooldown. Am I just tripping out? Like, why can't I... Oh, hang on, we need to click on this. So I was clicking on the component, we need to click on the actual actor. Projectile launching cooldown. So for the child 01, if this guy wanted to be a little bit harder, we could change that to 1. So his projectiles would be launching faster. And you'd obviously want to make these guys visually a little bit different so that you can tell them apart when they're in the map, but one of these guys will shoot faster than the other one. So it was the guy that was on the left just then shooting faster. Alright, so that's how you'd create tiers of these dudes. Now, the last thing that I was going to talk about was just the damage system. I'll put a link to the damage system in the description. That's basically a health system that is set up using a component, just like I showed you the projectile launching component. So you can go into your... Actually, I might even have it in here. I might just show you really quick. Obviously, you can just go and watch the video if you want. Health component. Do I have a... Actually, let me just go to health. Sorry, health, and if I go Control B to browse, damageable component, here it is. So yeah, so this is the damageable component. This is everything that we set up in that tutorial, which again is in the description. And if you wanted to apply that to this enemy that we just made, we could go to his blueprint and edit the blueprint. So this is the patrolling AI blueprint. You just go add component and you say damage component, like that. And then I think this might have had like a setup or something that was required. So yeah, it's got a setup event just like that. So we set up that inside of here. The tutorial for the projectiles is done, by the way, guys, so you can leave it any time if that's all you were here for. But if you wanted to set up damage, we say setup like that. And I'll probably explain all of this in the other video, the damage video. So you'd give him a max health. Now that is going to be something that is toggleable, so we can put that into there. A health bar. The health bar, I think, was just a widget, like that. And then if I go to widget class, health bar, I think that's it. Yeah, so his health bar can just sit above his head like that. Nice little size. And I can actually call that health bar too. Oh, it's getting really hot here today. We're in the middle of summer here in Australia and the fucking whole country's on fire, so we get like smoke floating over and just like suffocating. It's bullshit. And I'm sitting inside in an under-air conditioned room just dying slowly. But it's alright. What was I doing? So if we go to patrolling AI into the construction script, we put his health bar in like that. The owning actor is the self. And then he's got an option for loot as well, which I think I had a loot class. So we'll just drop that in there like that. And now he can take damage. I'm not sure how exactly he took his damage, but let's just go into our third person character and I'll see if I can damage him. I've got a feeling I had an event in here to kill player, take damage. He's got a take damage event. Right mouse button, I'm not sure what that does. Middle mouse button, sorry. It doesn't look like I actually have a damage event in here. Which is kind of annoying, but oh well. Once you have a damage event, or like an ability that can deal damage, is basically it tells this event to inflict damage on this component which is owned by such and such, and then it'll update the health bar, update the rotation of the health bar to face the camera, and then after a certain amount of time it'll hide the health bar so it'll disappear after they haven't taken damage in any while. And then once their health is below 0, it spawns the loot and it destroys the owner. So that's how the damage system works, and you can add that to anything, and you can also add that to your player character. So inside of here we could say damageable component, just like that. And then in the construction script you do the exact same thing that I showed you for this guy here. You just copy that and put it into the third person character construction script, and now this guy can take damage from the same stuff as the patrolling AI. So it's the same rules of the entire world apply to both the enemies and the players, and that's really cool when games work like that, I think, because the world's sort of indifferent rather than just a amusement park for the player where everything seems like set up just for them. It's cool when the whole world acts the same for the players and the AI. Okay, that's it guys. If you have any questions about this, let me know, but I'm going to leave that there. I'll see you next time.